Hi, my name is Karen Kornick. I am the treasurer with CCNI, and I'm looking forward to what Cathy has to share with us in a few minutes. And if you could please, put down your name and where you live, that would be awesome. I live in Dauphin, Manitoba, Canada, so I'm excited to be a part of boot camp this afternoon. I'm honored to be able to introduce to you Cathy Lee, a leadership coach and business consultant, and holds an ACC and a CCC credential. She enjoys a diverse career in executive leadership in both corporate and ministry positions over more than 30 years. Today, she coaches business and ministry leaders and missionaries across the globe to maximize their leadership influence. Cathy is a former CCNI board member, currently holds co-leaders Women in Coaching Community Group with Debbie Fawcett, and is a volunteer member of our CCNI prayer team. Cathy is an avid reader, I'll slow down, and a continual learner, loves to travel and play with landscape photography. In addition to living in Europe for several years, she's traveled to more than 20 countries, including a wonderful trip to Antarctica. She and her husband, John, have been married for 37 years. Welcome, Cathy.
Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you very much, and welcome, everyone. I know it's the end of the day. Your stomachs are probably beginning to growl. It's about supper time. Thank you for being here with us today. We're going to take a look at how we can aim for the bullseye with client assessments. And when you think about the bullseye for us coaches, what is the bullseye for us as a coach? We think about that. We learn pretty early in our coach training that we don't simply want our clients to solve a problem or overcome an obstacle. Our bullseye is really for our clients to change from the inside out and to gain greater clarity about themselves and their situation. So what I'd like you to do right now on your handout or on a sheet of paper, just jot down a few of your regular clients' names and leave some space there. We're going to come back to that in a moment. But I want you to be thinking about your own clients as we go through our talk today. So we've got a path forward. It's going to look like this. Oh, now we're not progressing. Let's see if we can do that. Yep, there we go. All right, so we're going to follow a path here of the value of assessments, looking at the value of assessments to coaching and some common pitfalls to assessments that we definitely want to avoid. We're going to talk about some practical examples of how assessments can fit into our coaching conversation. And lastly, we'll take a look at a path forward for you to begin doing more of that. So let's jump right in and take a look at the value of assessments. Now, throughout this presentation, I really would like to have some interaction. So get ready to add your comments in the chat box, and Karen's going to help us take a look at those. So as you begin thinking about your clients, how many of you use assessments in your coaching? Just put down in the chat, yes, I do, or what assessment you might use in your coaching today. Let's see how many of you use assessments in your coaching. We have any comments there?
Yes, Cathy, we have lots of yeses, almost always. StrengthsFinder, DISC, StrengthsFinder, DISC, Personal Elements.
Okay.
StrengthsFinder.
Okay, I thought there would be. So the truth is, all of us use assessments, whether they are formal or informal. We are always assessing a client. We are listening to their responses. We're observing body language. We're listening to their intonation or other clues that either consciously or subconsciously give us insights into that person. So a wise coach will consciously use assessments and all types of assessments to gain insights that can add value to their coaching experience. So let's look at 3 of the really simple assessments. And a lot of you mentioned some formal ones. Let's take a look at 3 types. Of course, we just mentioned listening to our client. As coaches, we're always looking for that powerful question that we can ask that generates that aha moment. I hear coaches all the time saying, I love it when my client just has that aha moment. We love that. But the truth is there's a really important step before that powerful question comes to us. And that is the act of listening, deeply listening, not just to what your client is saying, but what they are not saying, hearing the emotion that is around that client, or their tone or their language, even their behavior, their body language. Everything we know about that client comes into our assessment. So look at the names of your clients. And right now, just jot down a few of the traits that you know about them off the top of your head. As you listen to them or from the assessments, jot down a few traits from those clients that you know about them. And you might also think about some examples that you've experienced of some powerful questions that have come simply from listening to your client. Share a few of those examples with us. What are some examples of powerful questions that you've been able to bring to the conversation based on what you have just heard or observed from the client? What would some of those be?
Describe the meadow of relaxation you mentioned.
Okay.
It sounds like you're overwhelmed. What is overwhelming to you?
Okay, nice one. I loved in the last session, Janice LaForfetcher said, I understand we have internal processors and they need some time to think before they respond. So I like to give yourself a little bit of time for that. So one of the things that I experienced with my client, I had a client, and when I would get to a deeper question, kind of at the heart level, I began to notice that he would deflect my question, not outwardly, but he began to tell me an elaborate story, a long, involved story that I realized had very little relevance to the question I was asking. And I started picking up on the fact that he did not want to touch the heart level, the gut level kinds of questions that I was asking. And I finally just could stop and say, it appears that question has made you uncomfortable. What's behind that? And it took us some time to really dig down and understand what was triggering this deflection. But listening can really give you some insights into what's going on with your client and how to bring that next powerful question. Well, another type of assessment, simple assessment, is new client questionnaires. How many of you have your new clients fill out a questionnaire? And what are some questions that you ask that might give you some insights to help coach that client? Let's just share some examples on your new client questionnaire that might help you gain some insights.
What brings you to seek coaching?
It's a good one. One of the questions I love to ask is, what are your hobbies? And immediately that seems a very harmless question, but what it helps me do is to use their hobby, use a metaphor or an analogy from their hobby to bridge what they know and what they don't know. And if I can use a hobby that they love, it immediately clicks in their minds and they can bridge that gap with that metaphor. Life satisfaction questionnaire I see on that, a scale of 1 to 10. I love using the life satisfaction questionnaire. What else? I'm seeing, what is the best way for you to learn? I love that question too. Have you ever been in a formal coaching relationship? Karen, I'm sorry, I think I'm taking over your job here.
Nope, that's fine.
That's great. Those are some great questions. Think about your new client questionnaire and think about questions that you could include on there that would give you insights to target questions that would help them think. And last, of course, are commercially available assessments. Many of you mentioned StrengthsFinders or DISC or Myers-Briggs, or the Enneagram is becoming more popular. There are a lot of commercially available assessments that give you a lot of good information. If your client has already taken one, simply ask them for a copy of it. They're generally happy to share that with you. And be familiar enough with the most common assessments that you can read those and interpret those. What are some examples of some great questions you were able to share with your client based on an assessment or an inventory? What are some examples of great questions from assessments?
What did you notice?
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite came from a young man that had taken lots of assessments. He was a Myers-Briggs ENTJ. They call that the commander. And that's typically a bold, self-confident leader who is challenging status quo. And my question to him was, how does that show up at home? And he immediately, there was dead silence, and then he laughed and he said, not very well. So taking the commander home with them was not working. So that gave us a great opportunity to delve into how his personality could take it home without harming those relationships with his spouse and his children. Some of the other questions.
How did you see your top 3 values impacting your life? What was your overall response to the assessment? How do your strengths play a part in that? What did you rate yourself with the number? What surprised you about your assessment results? What area did you not agree with and why?
Yeah, I like that. If you have not been the one to give your client the assessment, if you just get a copy of it, be sure to ask them, did they receive coaching to debrief their assessment? And what did they learn from that? How has their assessment informed their personal development? That's always really helpful and perhaps an opportunity for you to coach them as well. Well, coaching is a little bit like anthropology. I don't know if you've ever thought of yourself as an anthropologist, but anthropology is really the study of culture. It's observing, listening, and asking questions to get below the surface of a people or a culture in order to understand what makes them who they are. and the current state of their experience. It's learning to speak their language in order to communicate more effectively. And isn't that part of what we do in coaching? I attended a workshop once hosted by Wycliffe Bible translators, and this is very close to the process they use for creating a written language for a new people group. And by the way, I just want to point out that's my sister-in-law in the photo there in India. She and her team spend several weeks every year sharing the gospel and discipling literally thousands of Indian children. So I always get some good stories from her about anthropology. And that's a little bit like what we do in coaching. Let's take a look at the PCCI standards in our core competencies. And we've looked at these so many times. I know that you're all familiar with these. I've included them in your handout. But let's just look at them again from the standpoint of assessments. Coaches' questions and observations are customized using what the coach has learned about who the client is and the client's situation. The coach inquires or explores using the client's language, explores the client's emotions, explores the client's tone of voice, their pace of speech or inflection, and the client's behaviors. In powerful questioning, coaches' questions use the client's language, and in direct communication, the coach uses the client's language. So we've looked at this many times. I'm sure you're familiar with these. And yet, as we listen and observe and explore our client's personality, words, and behavior, we should be tailoring our questions and our conversation to speak the client's language, their native language. And this effectively empowers the client to conceive new ideas and to think outside the box. It's their native language, so to speak. So let's take a look at a few of the common pitfalls that assessments, whether formal or informal, can take us down a less productive road with our clients. Now, Steve Moore, who is president of Next Leader and the creator of the Identity Profile Self-Awareness Tool, or IPSAT, defines at least 3 pitfalls of doing an assessment. And the first one is the pigeonhole effect. This picture of twins is a perfect example. I went to school with 2 sets of twins, and I learned that even though they looked very much alike, they were very different in personality and style. But the pigeonhole effect is labeling a client too quickly. Labeling a client too quickly. Maybe we've seen similar traits in another person, and so we pigeonhole our client, and it's supposed to tell us about them. There are just simply too many nuances with every style. Even the Myers-Briggs and Strengths Finders, there are too many nuances in every trait that we need to explore with our client. We reach a hypothesis, and that's okay, but we need to float that hypothesis with our client with a question like, it seems that you're very confident of your leadership ability. What do you think about that? And allow them to confirm or modify the hypothesis that you've come to. Well, another pitfall of assessments is the silo effect. We take all kinds of assessments. Our clients have taken all kinds of assessments. And we tend to think that these assessments are independent of one another, that they are siloed from one another. Part of the coaching around the IPSAT, which uses 5 assessments, including personality and strengths, spiritual gifts, skills, and passions. Part of the coaching around that is to help my clients craft a brief summary that includes the traits from all of those assessments, because God made us as one whole person. Interestingly, when we look at them as a whole, we're able to follow a thread through all of those assessments. So if your clients have taken multiple assessments in the past, ask them to pull them all out and work together to pull the traits that resonate for them in each one of them, and to look at their lives as a whole. We don't want to silo these into different silos. And the third, of course, is what Steve calls the inoculation effect. I love this one. Years ago, I was inoculated from the chicken pox. I never saw the chicken pox, and I never thought about it again. That's what we do with assessments sometimes. We'll take the assessment, look at the results, and agree that it represents us, and then it goes on the shelf. We never see it again. We never think about it. It certainly doesn't have an impact in our personal development. Again, as working with your clients, pulling out those assessments that have gone on the shelf, and unpacking the results of that to say, what would you like to develop out of that? What would you like to see from that assessment in your practice, in your life? You could think about that yourself. What assessments have you taken in years past that you've completely forgot about? Maybe it's time to pull that off the shelf and take a look at it again, all the assessments together as a whole. So what are some other pitfalls of assessments that you're familiar with? Let's just put in the chat, what are some pitfalls? Where have you seen assessments take a wrong turn?
Thinking they are scientific and absolutely accurate. Poor culture fit.
Mm-hmm.
Some overly complex and use insider jargon.
Yeah, not easy to unpack. That's true.
Labeling of self for others to just accept you instead of seeking to shape myself to get along with others.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, I like to tell my clients that assessments are our best effort at a tool, but we are, as the scriptures tell us, fearfully and wonderfully made. We cannot, with a tool, fully unpack. And that's why I love coaching around an assessment, is let's just talk about what you've seen in your life. How has that shown up? For different people, those same traits show up differently. I see Tim saying some can be overwhelming, and it may take too much time to really unpack the assessment with them. Yeah, I use a whole coaching session just for that. I mean, it's very it's not a quick exercise, is it? Well, let's move on. Karen, maybe this is a good spot before we go to the next section to give the first passcode.
Thank you, Cathy. So just to remind everyone, to receive your continuing education certificate, you'll need to attend this session until the top of the hour and then complete a survey. The link to the survey was delivered to your email box this morning. If you cannot locate the survey, please make sure you are accessing the email address you used for registration. If you cannot locate this email, please check your spam folder. In the event you are still unable to locate this email, please send an email to director@christiancoaches.com. Please complete the survey, and in the box for the last question, enter your full name and the two-part passcode for this session. A different passcode will be used for each session, and the two-part passcode will never be repeated. In part and in whole, once it has been given, per our agreement with ICF, the passcode cannot be given out after the session, even if you attend the session in question. However, you will be able to access the recordings and can elect to watch the recording afterwards and then complete the survey to obtain your continuing education certificate. We anticipate that you will receive your certificate a few days after the conclusion of Boot Camp 2018. So here we are, people. The first passcode is in the. I-N space T-H-E. In the.
All right. Thank you, Karen. We're going to move to where I'd really like to see us interact and brainstorm together some practical examples. We've looked at that a little bit, but whether you use formal or informal assessments, how do you put those to work in the coaching conversation to elevate our coaching and really empower the client? So a good place to begin are some key areas in the core competencies that we just spoke about. Let's take a look at those. The first one is, how does your client process new information? How do they think about information and how do they process that? The second one is, how do they use language? What kind of speech pattern and metaphors or direct speaking do they use? And the third is, how do they express emotion? And what is their pace for action? So let's take a look at those real quick. Now, I've provided a couple of examples, but if you want to think about your own clients on your sheet of paper, that's fine too. So think about this. How do they process information? I have two clients here. The gentleman here is very matter of fact. When he hears information, he's a fast processor, grasps situations quickly, is task-oriented and very decisive. That would be my husband, by the way. The other side is that this client is reflective. She likes to gather information and think about it. She's very people-oriented before she's task-oriented, and she thinks before acting. So let's imagine that we're coaching one of these clients or both of them, take your pick, and they have an interpersonal conflict that you are coaching them on, either with a colleague, a family member, or a friend. How would you phrase a question around these two clients or one of your own to help them think about this conflict that they are experiencing in their workplace or family? Let's put some questions in the chat. Just think about getting them started thinking about this conflict.
The man on the left, what is your bottom line concern? What part of the conflict do you need to own? How do you think the person you are in conflict with is seeing the situation? The biggest challenge in communicating with your boss?
Very good. Very good.
To the gentleman, what might happen if you pause to hear out your reflection, colleague?
I'll have to get a copy of the chat and save all those good questions for speaking with my husband.
What does the other person need to hear to stay open to another perspective?
Okay. So what about I don't know if we're deciding between the young lady who's more reflective and likes to gather information. Think about that. I noticed that some of your questions to the gentleman were pretty direct, And that's speaking his language. That would not be true for the young lady. Now, I do want to point out that a person who is very direct and factual, our gentleman here, they want to go to solutions very quickly. They're decisive. And you can ask them a question that is direct and it won't offend them. They're not offended by direct questions, but they are going to want to go to a solution quickly. So you may want to think just the opposite, to say, what is the impact of this conflict on you? In other words, take them a little bit deeper than they are on the surface willing to go. So knowing that they are decisive, knowing that they're task-oriented, they're ready to get it done, you might need to slow them down a little bit and get them to think more about the impact of that conflict, what the impact is having on them. And again, the same is true for the young woman. Maybe she likes gathering information. She might be slow to come to an action. For her, you might need to press her a little bit and help her understand that at some point she's going to have to take some action. Well, let's take a look at how the client uses language. Let's just say that our gentleman here, he's very direct and factual. I've put on your handout, he's a person who tells. He tells. But our young lady here, and these are not gender, I hesitated because they're almost gender labeled. I don't mean for that to be the case at all. So forget gender for a moment. But an indirect person might ask, even when they're telling, they form it as a question. They're more indirect. They're imaginative. How would you phrase a question to a person that is, let's take our young lady here, who is more indirect and more imaginative? How would you help them get below the surface about this conflict and what they need to do about that? I'm seeing, what if the client doesn't want you to coach them at the heart level, but want to go to the action steps? Yeah, that's a really good question. I come into that a little slower, and typically people like our gentleman here that doesn't want to go to the heart level, you've got to come into that a little slower and work towards that. Obviously, the heart level is where we live out of, so that's where we want to go. That's where life change, transformation is going to happen, but it's going to be a lot slower. When we look at the next one, I'll just go to the next slide. When we talk about expressing emotion, typically our gentleman here does not like the words feel or feelings. And sometimes as a coach, we often use the question, how does that make you feel? Or, well, how do you feel about that? People that are very direct and objective, practical, don't resonate with the word feel or feelings. They don't resonate with heart language. So we've got to work our way there a little bit slower by using other terms. For instance, we might say, what is this conflict stirring up in you? What is it stirring up? I'm not asking him how he feels. What is it stirring up? Or what's important about that conflict? What's important about that relationship? So you might have to use some other terms to lead them a little slower down to that heart level. Does that answer your question?
Sherry put, if you could envision the conflict decreasing, what would that look like?
That's a good objective question. So again, using the client's language is understanding the traits of your client and phrasing that question in a way that they will respond to and relate to. Not everyone responds to those feeling questions. Anyone else want to contribute there before we move on? Those are some good questions. And think about your own clients that you've written down on your sheet. What are some unique questions that you would bring to them, knowing how they use emotion, knowing how they use language, the words they use, whether they're creative and imaginative, if metaphors especially resonate with them, or if they're very factual and task-oriented. Those are the things that make a difference. Pace for action, you might just throw some questions in the chat for people that are a little too quick to get to an action step. How do you slow them down and really think about the best action or the most appropriate action? If they're very quick to very decisive or quick to take action, how do you slow them down? Let's throw some questions up.
What are 3 possible steps you could take?
Nice. Yeah, start with 3.
If you road tested that, what could be the result?
Mm-hmm.
The Bible talks about counting the cost. What do you see as cost of making this decision?
Yes, when we quick decision makers often envision the best outcome of their decision. So taking them to the kind of the potential pitfalls is a great way to make them slow down a little bit. What's the worst case scenario here? What's the worst case scenario that could happen? And are you prepared for that? Might be a good way to slow them down.
What could you try that you have never done before?
Very good. So I want to emphasize here I've presented some ideas about learning the traits of your client and speaking their language. What I don't want you to hear me saying is just following their pattern. I hope I've pointed out that sometimes we kind of buck the system a little bit, and we use their language, but we use it in a way that causes them to think more deeply or about the flip side. So we use terms that they would resonate with. We use language, metaphors that they can relate to, but our goal is to listen to what's not being said, to listen to the underlying emotion, whether it's reflected on their face or not, and to use their language to get them thinking at that heart level and taking action steps. So sometimes you have to come through the back door, so to speak, to get them to that powerful question and get them to life transformation. Hope that makes sense. So let's move on. Let's talk about a path forward. Many of you have used formal assessments. If you use formal assessments, what's a way that you can practice that more deeply in relating those formal assessments to your clients' language, emotion, behavior, or style. Or if you use informal, how do you take another step to tailor your questions to each client? Let's throw out some ideas. How can we take the next step, whether formal or informal? One of the things I try to do, especially with some of my high-powered business leaders that are moving very quickly, I try to review their traits right before a coaching call. So if I have a formal assessment on them, I quickly review their traits. I might summarize in my client contact list the traits that stand out the most that I've seen show up in a coaching conversation. I have a business client that wants everyone to be happy. And so her trait, her tendency is to compromise what needs to be done in the guise of harmony. So reviewing that before I get on the call especially makes me attuned to her avoiding conflict in her workplace as a leader.
So Cathy, we have a couple questions here. What could you try that you have never done before? Use results of a different assessment to ask client for connections to this one.
Okay, make connections, yeah.
Stay curious, not like, now I know you.
Oh, great, Sherry, thank you.
I like to point out how their personality, etc., from the assessment is showing up in the action and thoughts they use during the coaching session.
Oh, Kelly, that's awesome. That shows that you are tailoring it to them when you can connect what they're doing in the moment to what their assessment or their personality reflected, what they shared about their personality. You know them, you've made an investment to get to know them, and you're helping them see that in the moment. And I love just staying curious. Again, that's that pigeonhole, avoiding that pigeonhole. Like, I know you now, I know what you're going to do. We don't want to fall into that trap, but remaining curious. As you look at the list of your own clients, what are some areas that you'd like to go back to those clients with a little more information, or to be better informed to approach your clients as you look at the list of your own clients? What would you like to practice with them? Maybe it's time to pull out your old assessments and review them. I like this process of pick one, practice, and repeat. So take a look at the core competencies and pick one. Just pick one. Maybe it's language, maybe it's emotion, maybe it's processing information or behavior. Pick one. Connect it to a client and practice it with one client, just one. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to try to do them all. So pick one, practice with them, and get comfortable with that. And then pick another one. Take those over time and pick another client or another trait that you want to listen for, and work on relating in the client's own language, just one trait or one client at a time, and repeat that over time. So let's stop here and just open for questions. If you have questions for me.
I'll just read a couple comments in here, Cathy. How do their strengths show up in their daily life? And Amanda put, I have a client who took a year off, so reviewed how she things might have changed, or changing situations may reflect something different.
Right, with a previous client that has come back to you after a year, that's a great place to start. Is again, holding those assessments loosely and confirming what's changed. How are you different? Is this still true of you? And allowing them a chance to affirm or modify those. Very good. How do strengths show up in your daily life? Pick that strength and ask, how is this showing up? Does it show up differently at work from at home? For us to get to that powerful question, we've got to listen deeply. We've got to hear our clients and observe our clients, their culture, so that we know where to take those questions. And when we speak their language, that's when they have great breakthroughs. Any other questions for me? We've got a little bit of time here.
So Cathy, do you have a favorite assessment?
Well, right now I'm working with the IPSAT, and it's become my favorite because it's 5 assessments in one. So I think Kelly posted, there it is, myipsat.com. It takes Myers-Briggs, the Clifton Strengths, a skills inventory, a spiritual gifts test, and a passion, my passion profile. And it walks clients through all 5 of those. So it includes coaching around all 5 of those and pulling them together, not siloed, but pulling those together and helping the client see how fearfully and wonderfully made they are as God made them, so that they're utilizing those resources in whatever their pursuit is, whatever their mission in life. I also like it because it lets us focus on potential pitfalls. As you know, all of our strengths have kind of this downside, which we call the basement. And those are good questions too, by the way. When you work with a client on assessments, is asking them, how does this work against you? How does being a strong, bold leader at work, challenging status quo, how does that work against you at home? How might that work against you with some of your employees? And the IPSAT does that very well. That's my favorite. I've worked with DISC, I've worked with Berkman, I still use the Berkman, Enneagrams, I've worked with several in the past. Any questions for me?
Recently, I did an assessment called Live Styles and was coached around it. It was new to me, but I liked it very much.
Very good. Thank you for that website. If there are other assessments that you all are using that you'd like to share, they all, it's kind of like Bible translations. They each kind of have their strength. I also use occasionally what's the Marcus Buckingham's recent one, we use that occasionally. They all kind of have a different strength to them. I use Berkman for some of my career people, you know, more often than the IPSAT perhaps, but you might put in your favorite assessment here and go back and look at your client intake questionnaire and just evaluate your questions in terms of what that might tell you about new clients coming on board. Take a moment on your handout. There's a question at the very end. What have you learned today or heard today that you might like to practice? And make a note of that. Yeah, life harmony values assessment. Someone's got a simple wheel of life can give great insight. That's great, Kelly, thank you. 5 Voices, 5voices.com is also a good one. Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, here's a question, as I've not used such assessments yet, how do you ask your client to do such an assessment, and is it for free? That's a great question. I do ask my clients to do an assessment. There are lots of ways you can frame that. If you can make it part of your package. Janice last session talked about creating coaching packages. And you can incorporate, if you have an assessment that you love to coach around, that you have found very valuable to your clients, particularly the niche that you are serving, you might incorporate that assessment right into your coaching package, include any costs that your out-of-pocket costs that you assume, and put that in your coaching package. Other people use it as an add-on. Would you like to do this assessment? Here's the value or the benefit it will deliver, and here is the cost of that assessment. You might do that if you only use those assessments occasionally, particularly if they're just in certain circumstances or situations, then it might be an add-on. So again, presenting the value of that assessment, even if it's rolled into your package, you want to communicate the value of doing that assessment. Did that answer your question, Christine? Kelly's included a website here, Highland SCO. Yep, another one. Any other questions before we wrap up? There are many assessments in other languages, so take a look. Take a look at the assessments, read about them. I know StrengthsFinders and Berkman are in many languages. I think DISC may be in many other languages. I'm not sure about Myers-Briggs, if anyone knows that, so very good. Okay, I'm going to give you my information here. Feel free to call me. That's my cell phone. That's what I answer. Email and website. You can look at the IPSAT there at the bottom with that link, and feel free to contact me if any questions come to you after the webinar is over. Karen, would you like to give the last of the password?
Thanks, Cathy. Yes. So the last part of the password is LIGHT. L-I-G-H-T. And so, Cathy, we'd like to thank you for speaking today, and we'll just see if there's any quick questions here left, and thank everybody for coming to the session.
Very good. Thank you all.